In the early to mid 1990s, when I first started climbing in climbing gyms, pockets were all the rage. I'm pretty sure that the gym I started climbing in had entire routes made up of two fingers and monos. There were probably hundreds of pockets in the gym on any given day. Sometime in the 2000s, pockets fell out of favor in climbing gyms, partially for liability reasons. I think partially because the outdoor areas that had a lot of pockets also fell out of favor around the same time. But the result is it's pretty rare to see a two-finger pocket in the gym these days, and you may never see a mono in the gym ever again. But if you're climbing at Wild Iris, you're absolutely going to come across two fingers. And if you're climbing above the mid 512 level, you're absolutely going to have to pull on a mono at some point. And it's tough to prepare if you have to only hang on them. If that's all you've got, then by all means, that's what you should do. But there are some ways that we can prepare for climbing on pockets other than just hanging, and maybe that we should be preparing for climbing on pockets. And there are also some tips about pockets we're going to get into that concern which teams of fingers you use, and maybe some ways to engage with pockets that we don't often do on the edges and slopers that are so prevalent in gyms today. All right, let's get into it. Okay, first, let's talk about two-finger teams. Most of us are going to have a preferred team, and I'm absolutely generalizing here. This is just something I've noticed over the years. I know a lot of women who prefer front two and a lot of men who prefer middle two. This is not always the case, just a generalization. However, I think it's important that we all get strong with both teams of two fingers, front two and middle two. And this is because if we look at the two fingers, they're shaped in opposite on a lot of us. So my front two are angled this way, my middle two angled the opposite way. And because pockets are going to be shaped a little differently, they might fit one team better than the other. Now, if it's a really deep pocket, that may not matter so much, but as the pockets get pretty shallow, that can be a pretty big difference. That's a half pad difference nearly between my front finger and my middle finger. So if I'm trying to take it this way and that doesn't fit, I might lose a half a pad from that hold, whereas it might fit better with these two. So we have to keep that in mind and pay attention to which finger team fits the pocket the best. Especially in a place like Wild Iris, you're going to encounter pockets that you have to grab with a finger team that may not be your preferred team. So better to be strong there to begin with. Now, along those same lines are back three. Why on earth would anyone use their back three fingers as opposed to the front three fingers? Front three are almost always going to be stronger for most of us. However, there's one really good reason, and this is going to come into play, especially if you're climbing at Wild Iris. Now, the front three fingers, actually, like we just talked about, aren't going to create a straight line. Mine are angled two opposite ways, with my middle finger being the longest. My back three, however, create a more straight line. So I can take small edges with this back three better than I can with this front three quite often. And especially if I'm making a big cross, if I'm trying to cross into a pocket, these front three might not quite get in, whereas the back three can settle onto this edge much easier, the edge of this little pocket, much easier than my front three, where my pointer finger might not get into the pocket at all. So being strong with those back three is a really valuable tool in sequential pockety areas in particular. Now, anytime you're climbing on pockets, oftentimes the pocket can be used in multiple directions. It's not like a crimp where you can only pull one way on it very often. A pocket, you might be able to pull all the way around the pocket, And that might come into play for later moves, particularly in situations like if you're using that lower pocket that you've already passed essentially to help you move your feet around. You might be able to now use it as a side pull or as an undercling as opposed to the down pull that you were using before. Or if you're making a big move, a big series of moves, or you're bumping one hand, this down pulling pocket might be flipped into an undercling to continue bumping that hand. So make sure you're exploring lots of different ways that that pocket can be used rather than seeing it as this one-dimensional grip like we're very often used to getting in climbing gyms. And that leads us right into another tip for climbing at Wild Iris, which is oftentimes there are going to be pockets within pockets. The thing that you hit initially might be pretty bad. And if you go a little deeper, there might be this pocket that you can curl your fingers into and it suddenly becomes a lot better. You might hit something at full extension and get the lip of it, and then as you get a little higher on it, be able to re-grip into the pocket and get a much better part of the pocket. So don't be satisfied, especially if you're working at a red point and you're trying to find the easiest ways to do moves. Explore those pockets. Look inside them. Try to see where the best part of that pocket is and what the best way you can take it is. And like we mentioned earlier, try it with different teams and fingers. You might find that even though you're not as strong with a certain team, it fits the pocket better and you can do the move easier. And my last pocket climbing tip is to pay attention to the shoes that you're wearing, particularly in an area like Wild Iris, which is very sequential. You often are using the same pockets that you have already moved past from your hands to now step in with your feet. And as those pockets get smaller, you're getting less and less of your toe into those pockets. So a really blunt-toed shoe might not get into these little two-finger pockets, whereas a toe that's a little pointier is going to get in there a little more, give you a little bit of an extra foothold, and that can make all the difference on these big, hard, precise moves that you're going to encounter. All right, so hopefully this impresses upon you the importance of learning to climb on pockets, practicing climbing on pockets. So if you have a home wall, get yourself some pockets. If you're in a gym that occasionally sets with pockets, make the most of those problems and those routes by climbing on them and adjusting them to be a little more difficult if you need them to be by using worse feet or skipping holds, or make them a little easier by just adding a pocket into an existing boulder that's nearby rather than doing the entire problem that might be a little too strenuous. Take those opportunities. And if you have to, just climbing with two fingers on a lightly overhanging or vertical wall on small jugs that you could fit four in, but climbing with two might help you learn how to maneuver yourself around pockets a little better. And that's going to go a long way when you're outside, standing on those little polished feet and looking to make a big move to another two-finger pocket.